So, if I introduce myself, then I'm Andrew Blake Herbert. I'm the Chief Executive here of the Council, and also doing the presentation this morning is Jane West, the Chief Operating Officer, or otherwise the person that's responsible for the Council's purse strings, and therefore the budget overall. So we're going to talk you through this morning the background to the Council's budget, where we are, what that looks like, and the context between ourselves and other councils. What we call our medium-term financial strategy, which are the proposals we've got to get us through the financial circumstances that we currently face. We'll go into the specific options around service reductions and income generation that are being considered, and the transformation programmes that we're looking at for the Council too. And then at the end, we'll just pick up on the timetable and a pact that we want to have with you as our residents about what we will do for you and what we would like you to do when you go about your day-to-day business within the borough, which will help us as a council as we go along. So Jane and I will take that in turns, and we'll work through that. So to be very upfront about what that budget gap is, as you can see on the slide in front of you, we think over the next 4 years the financial challenge that we face is about £37 million. And that includes things from the increased pressure we face from services and the cuts that we face in funding from the government combined together. And it's built up on a set of assumptions, and it includes things such as, without any growth in the population, the cost of the waste disposal that we currently have due to the changes in landfill tax will go up by £1 million a year, even if there is no additional waste during that time period. So over a 4-year period, £4 million of that £37 million is the cost of that waste disposal. There's a couple of graphs at the bottom of the slide which show you some of the changes in demand that we face as a local authority. On the left-hand side, you've got adult social care and the number of clients that we interact with each year. And you can see over the last 3 years, that's gone up from 6,300 contacts to now 7,200. And all of that obviously takes time for staff, the number of staff that we need to employ to do that. And if there's a service that's required at the end of it, obviously the cost of putting that service in place. On the right-hand side, you've then got the children's services provision, and again you can see the steep rise in children numbers that are there, going from 5,800 contacts 3 years ago to last year over 9,500 contacts. Havering's renowned for having the oldest population in London. Our population as a percentage is actually more elderly than Bournemouth's. So if Bournemouth is the retirement capital of the UK, not quite sure what that makes Havering. But for the last 4 years, we've actually had the fastest growing children's numbers of all the London boroughs. And that's where those impacts in demand for services come through. And just to dispel one of the myths, that's not just about people moving to the borough. More than half of those are about children that are born at Queen's Hospital in Romford. So what do the cuts in our funding look like? Over a 5-year period from 2015-16 through to the next financial year, you get to see there the funding that we used to get through what was called the Revenue Support Grant, through to what we're currently getting this year at 0, and a very small increase back into next year of roughly 1.4 million. But that's gone down from £30 million in 2015-16. And if we were to go back to austerity and when austerity began in 2010, that graph would look at like £67 million. So over that time period, there's been a huge reduction in the funding that we have as a local authority to provide services. Oh. Slide dropped out there. So slide disappeared from there. One of the next slide that would have been up there was going to pick up on the value for money position that the council currently faces. And what we did in the build up to the elections in May is we employed an organisation called Ipsos Mori to come in and do a survey of residents. And it was a survey that was statistically significant in terms of the population overall and the age profiles within the population too. And one of the things that came out from that survey was about the council's value for money. And only 40% of respondents felt that this council offered them value for money. And probably the primary principal reason behind that is our level of council tax. We do currently have the fourth highest council tax in London. But that's not because the council is inefficient, not because we are wasting your money and not spending it on the right and appropriate services. It's because of the impact of that level of funding that we have in the first place and what that does for us as a local authority compared with others. And the table that you've got here in front of you picks up on the impact of austerity and what that has looked like for different councils. And the top half of the table picks up on the so-called smallest losers. They've still lost some significant sums of money, but if I pick on the top one there of Newham Council, you can see the reductions in funding that they have had have been 59% of their funding. The bottom half of the table picks up on those in London that have lost the largest amount of funding. And you can see there Havering highlighted in the yellow or gold band, and that we have lost 96% of our funding. So a massive difference between those in the top half of the table and those in the bottom half of the table. You'll see we haven't been the worst. There are some that have lost allegedly more than 100% of their funding. Obviously that's not something that you can do, and it is capped to that 100% level. But you get to see the difference there between different councils. Some of the other things that came out from that survey were about council services overall and how they reflect, and the majority of our services got rated at between 70 and 91% satisfaction, with that 91% being about our parks and open spaces. We've got 108 parks in the borough, which is the largest number of all the London boroughs, and 14 of those parks are independently assessed at green flag status. So it's something that we're very proud of, and obviously something that residents recognise as one of the real attributes of the borough. But that doesn't mean we're complacent, doesn't mean we're looking at how we can strive to improve things further, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But trying to drive up that satisfaction is something that we absolutely aspire to do. So having said we've lost a huge sum of funding from the government and that we've got demographic pressures that we face in terms of the cost of our services that we have to provide, what does that cumulative impact look like over that period? And you've got here a table that shows you the breakdown by service area, but if I just focus on the figure in the bottom right-hand corner of the table, you get to see that the financial challenge that we've had over that 5-year period has been cumulatively £77 million worth of service pressures or cuts in funding that we've faced. And you get to see within the table that actually pretty much every single area of the council over that time has contributed towards how the council's had to manage and deliver with that cut in funding or increase in pressure. However, that doesn't mean there aren't things that we can't do as a council to improve services and to improve the lives of our residents and the opportunities that they have. And a couple of years ago, a new vision was set for the borough. And as a council, it wasn't just about us and what we did, but it was about us as place shaper, how we work with the voluntary sector, with other partners and with our residents and businesses to actually deliver a better outcome for all. And there were 4 themes within that vision, 2 on this slide around communities and connections. I'm just going to talk you through a couple of examples under each of the themes about things that have improved during that time period, where despite austerity and the challenges that we've faced, we've been able to deliver some real outcomes for people. And on the next slide, I'll pick up on the other 2 themes. So in the top left-hand corner, we've got our communities theme, and one of the things we've done in there is around social care. So about 2 years ago, Ofsted came in to inspect our social services provision, and they phone on a Monday morning at 8 o'clock and they turn up the following day at 9 o'clock, and they spend 3 to 4 weeks in the council turning over everything that they want to understand the services we provide and the quality of provision we have for children. And when they did that just under 2 years ago, we were rated as requires improvement, which is absolutely not where we wanted to be. Ofsted came back. They normally come back after 3 years, but they came back after 18 months, allegedly to do us a favour. I'm not sure, certainly for the staff in social services, in the children's team, that it ever feels like they're doing you a favour when they come in and do an inspection. But certainly in terms of the outcome, that was the position, because we were able to move from requires improvement to a good overall rating. But the one element I just wanted to focus on was about the cocoon. And the Cocoon is our centre for looked after children, whereas a council, we are the corporate parent for children that have had to have been taken away from their families for safeguarding reasons. And what we were able to do with the Cocoon, at very little cost, was work with young people around what they needed in terms of the support, and just change how we operated and what we did, having listened to them. And the inspectorates, when they fed back to us verbally, described the Cocoon as outstanding, which is the highest rating you can get. In the narrative, when we actually got the written report, it was highly commended rather than outstanding, but it was a significant change that we were able to make without investing money, by listening to our service users and what they needed. And the budget consultation is a prime example of that. We genuinely want to hear from residents about the challenges that we're facing, about what that means for them, and about what the right decisions are for us to take as we go forwards. In the bottom right-hand corner, we've got connections. And there are two elements to the connections theme. One is about transport, the second one is about IT. But just focusing on the transport element, obviously we've been working with Transport for London for a significant period of time now, lobbying to get improvements in our infrastructure, and the new Elizabeth line is very shortly going to go live fully. Some of you may have been on the new trains, certainly during the summer period in the heat. Being lucky enough to get one of the new air-conditioned trains was a great experience. From January next year, all of the trains will be the new trains, and they will have 2 additional carriages on. So they will go from 6-carriage trains to 8-carriage trains. From January 2020, the final stage of the Elizabeth line opens, and the tunnels through London will finally be connected, and you will actually be able to get on a train. And we're blessed to have 3 Crossrail stations in the borough, at Romford, Haroldwood and Gidea Park, and you will actually be able to get on one of those trains and go all the way to Heathrow without needing to change train at any point in time. So fantastic opportunities for our residents to be able to get and access other parts of London in a much better way, but also a fantastic opportunity for businesses to locate here and for their staff to be able to come in and work in a different way too. So again, without investment from the council, that's something that's giving us a real opportunity as we go forwards. The other 2 themes are about places and opportunities. And under places, regeneration is something that we're absolutely looking at. With the introductions of things like Crossrail, Havering will absolutely become a more desirable place for people to want to live and locate. And with things such as the parks that we've already talked about, it's a very pleasant area to want to live in. As a council, we want to make sure that that regeneration creates the right communities and is sustainable as we go forwards. We currently have over 2,000 people on our housing waiting list and nearly 1,000 people living in temporary accommodation. And when we're talking about those, we're talking about people that are genuinely Havering residents. Our housing allocation policy currently requires people to have lived in the borough for 6 years to be entitled to council housing. So that challenge and that pressure we face is something that we need to rise to, something where the council needs to get back into house building to be able to provide the accommodation for our residents as we go forwards. But what we don't want to do is just have the private sector come in and do the buildings that they want to do. We want to be a partner in that to make sure that we get the right growth for the right reasons, that it's of the right quality, but more importantly, that we have the right infrastructure to go with it, be that schools, be that health provision, or be that the right infrastructure in terms of transport to be able to support that growth in regeneration. So it is something the council is positively and actively engaging with to make sure it is the right growth in the right way. In the bottom left-hand corner, we then have our opportunities box, and the examples in here about our leisure provision. And some of you may well have been to the Sapphire Ice and Leisure Centre in Romford Town Centre, which opened back in February. The Sapphire Ice and Leisure on its opening weekend had over 12,000 visitors through the doors. It was free on the first weekend, which might have helped, but actually in its first 3 months we had over 80,000 visitors use that centre. And it's a fantastic centre for all ages to be able to use all types of sporting facilities, including the ice rink that is in there. And there are events such as youth and teenage discos in the evenings, and it's fantastic to see young people go out and do their ice hockey training, because when you see some of them go onto the ice, they're actually as wide as they are tall with the shoulder pads that they have to wear. But getting to see young people involved in that type of sport and activity is really, really good. And we were able to provide the Sapphire Ice and Leisure Centre with a very large capital receipt from a national supermarket and a grant from Sport England. So that was able to be done and provided at no expense to local taxpayers. So it's a really, really fantastic opportunity for residents as we go forwards. At the same time, we have expanded the leisure provision in Harold Hill at Central Park, and we're about to commence the re-provision of the Harold Lodge Sports Centre as well. So making sure we're investing in that infrastructure for people has been really key. So the value for money for slides just popped up here, so I won't dwell on that one. I think I covered those bullet points as we went through. It's obviously just jumped forward a few slides. So the last part I want to just dwell on very quickly before I hand over to Jane to take you through the options that we're looking at to close the budget gap is actually overall what's happened to our bottom line. So I talked to you about cuts in funding, I talked to you about the pressures that we face as an organisation, and this table shows you our current net budget for providing all the services we are required to provide. And the figure in the bottom right hand corner there shows you that roughly at the moment our budget is £160 million. If I went back to the beginning of austerity in 2010, put up a similar slide, our net budget back then would actually only have been £168 million. So we've lost all of that central government funding, and we've had all of those demand pressures that we've talked about, but actually the net budget for the council has only come down by just over £8 million. And that's because we've become much more commercial in our outlook about how we operate as a council, and that we have been able to find alternative sources of income to support the services that residents need in the borough, and that's obviously our aspiration as we continue to go forwards. At that point, I'll hand over to Jane to take you through some of the items. Sneak past you.
Lovely, thank you, Andrew. So as Andrew said earlier, I'm Jane West. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Havering, and part of that role involves being responsible for the finances of the council. In law, all local authorities have to balance their budget. We're not allowed to run at a deficit. We have to make sure that we have enough income to cover our expenditure. And actually in law, it's my responsibility to make sure the local authority achieves that. So I actually have a legal responsibility for that. Taking you back to Andrew's introduction, the problem that we've got is a £37.8 million problem that we need to resolve over the next 4 years. And I'm using this graph to sort of illustrate to you the fact that actually that budget gap is front-loaded, so the problem is front-loaded. As the graph shows you, in 1920, the current estimation of that budget gap is 14.7 million. The greyish shaded blocks are showing you that actually when we set the budget at the beginning of this year, we thought probably we were short for next year's budget by about £10 million, but that's actually grown over the last 6 months as more information has become available to us. And you can see that that's happened, you know, sort of on some of the other years as well. So as I said, a £14 million gap for next year, but then also a nearly £13 million gap for 2021 as well. So the bulk of the £37.8 million issue needing to be resolved in the first 2 years of the budget strategy. And that totals just under £28 million. So quite a large number of savings that we need to find over the coming few months. So how do we go about solving a problem of a £28 million gap in the first 2 years and a £37 million gap in over 4 years? Well, clearly we need to do some things very quickly. And so we've divided our savings programme into the things that you've got in front of you here, which are quicker wins, potential service reductions and income changes in order to be able to balance the budget. But then we have a sort of second tranche of suggestions which are more transformational, but by their nature will take longer to actually deliver. The transformational items will be much more about changing the way we provide services, and hopefully will also be providing improvements for customers, as well as the reduction in costs that we're looking for. But the ones I'm just going to take you through on the screen at the moment are actually service reductions. We accept that they are service reductions that we're talking about here. So if I take you through the list slowly, the review of council tax support is the first item. When universal credit was introduced, the government decided that actually council should retain the responsibility for council tax support, the benefit for helping people to pay their council tax. They gave us a grant to do that, but they only actually gave us 85% of the money we needed to actually provide that service. And so when we introduced it, we subsidised claimants for 85% of the cost, but we expected claimants to make the other 15% contribution. As time's gone on, as Andrew said earlier, what we've seen is a reduction in government grants, so that actually at this point in time we're not actually expecting to receive any government grant moving forward. And so we're not actually receiving any government grant in relation to this particular cost. And so what the consultation is suggesting is that we actually review the level of contribution being made by to their council tax payments of people who are receiving in other benefits. And what the consultation is suggesting is that for working age claimants, that their contribution should go up to 25%, and that for working age claimants with a disability, that their contribution should go up to 20%. Now, this doesn't affect the elderly at all. The elderly are fully compensated. This is simply around working age claimants. The second item on the list then is increased council tax premium on empty properties. At the moment, we charge a premium of 50% on empty properties that have remained vacant for more than 2 years. And obviously that's an incentive to people to bring properties back into use. The government is just changing the rules and looking to allow us to increase those premiums, and what we're consulting on here is actually increasing the premium to 100% rather than 50%. The next item is a review of the voluntary sector discretionary rate relief. At the moment, the voluntary sector is able to claim a 80% contribution from the government as mandatory relief. And then the council can choose to top it up. It's a discretion, but can choose to top that up by the other 20%. And the council sets its own criteria as to what that contribution can be. So the contributions are based on whether or not the services that have been provided from those voluntary sector actually fit with the priorities of the council. And that's the review that's underway at the moment. The next one on the list is reduction in the number of front doors the council currently has. We have a large number of operational buildings across the Havering area, and what we want to do is see whether or not we can rationalise the actual physical buildings and bring services together into a smaller number of buildings, because that should actually reduce our costs in terms of the cost of the premises, utilities costs, business rates costs, etc., the cost of staff looking after those buildings. This isn't about service reduction, it's about the number of physical buildings. The next one on the list is non-replacement of the public toilets that are provided currently through the JC to Cope contract. That comes to an end next summer. It's quite an expensive contract, and the toilets that are provided are not that popular. So what we'd rather do is replace that with a community toilet scheme, where actually members of the public are directed towards other places where they can use toilets, such as cafes or shopping centres or council buildings. Next on the list is a review of street lighting across the borough. The borough has many rural areas, it has many urban areas which clearly need to be lit at all the hours of darkness, but somewhere in between that there's probably some of the lights that can be switched off or dimmed sort of at certain times of the night. And so again, we're looking at the whole borough to consider, you know, so which lights can be dimmed. The Queen's Theatre in the borough currently occupies a building which is owned by the council. It pays no rent for that. There's no lease agreement sort of between us at the moment. The Queen's Theatre also provide lots of community activities, and we do actually provide a grant to them. We're in conversations with the Queen's Theatre at the moment about how we might redefine that relationship between us in terms of any rents that should be payable to the council, but also services that they may be able to take on for the council. And that could work within that front doors review as well, whether there's things that they could actually sort of accommodate for us. Next on the list is the introduction of charges for brokerage in adult social care. At the moment, we assist people to find either home care solutions or maybe residential solutions, and then they pay for those themselves, they're self-funders. We have decided that maybe we should look at charging for the assistance that we give self-funders for helping them to identify their care requirements, how they can be provided. And then finally on this list, we're having a look at our subsidy for assistive technology. So that's technology which allows people to remain in their own homes and assist them to stay there, such as home alarms. Again, in this area, we subsidise more than other councils do, and we want to review to see whether the level of subsidy is the correct one. So that's all the sort of service reduction areas that we're consulting on at the moment, and which are included in the survey. But the second area is the transformation agenda. And I'm going to start by talking about demand management and community capacity. One of the areas of transformation for the council is that if the council has to step back from some services because it has less money in order to be able to provide local services, then an important part of that agenda must be about the community becoming more resilient and being able to support itself. But we absolutely recognise our role in supporting the community to build that resilience. We've got a number of projects underway in this area. The first one on the list there is around looking at a locality model whereby already we've brought together some adult social care and some healthcare services into 3 locality areas of the borough. We've got a north office, a south office and a central office. But we're looking to see whether or not we can expand that model to actually bring other services in, such as homelessness and other housing services, helping people to stay in a tenancy which maybe is breaking down, and other public health services, etc., bringing them all into one place so that service can actually be very person-centric rather than being service-centric. So rather than somebody having a set of problems and having to go to a range of different council offices to receive support around those, actually the person can present all the problems and then the one location can work out what the solutions are. Because occasionally we see people presenting with what they think is a health issue, but actually it might be a housing issue, and by bringing those together we can get to better outcomes. There's also an area around this which is about providing the physical housing for people to be supported more. So that rather than people having to go into residential care, that actually we can keep them more independent, but just give them a little bit of support around their own homes, the supported housing options. Reducing homelessness is obviously a big issue that we need to tackle, and we have some sort of plans around providing additional types of accommodation, more flexible accommodation. And then a more universal offer is around community hubs, and whether actually we can bring, again, about reducing the number of physical locations that we're using, but actually, again, bringing services together so that people just have to go to one place to be directed to how to access services on the website, for example. So actually having people there to provide digital support to them, but also having people available who can direct towards whatever right health services are that they may need, or to direct them to the locality's place. But it might actually be about having the community coming together in those areas. So the business community, there's small businesses in the area, having somewhere for them to come and work together, and also, working with sort of youngsters in the community who, by talking to people who are running businesses, it raises aspiration. It may be that there can be some skills transfer, etc. So building sustainable communities, I've talked about some of the physical sort of provision from the council, but actually we want to support the community to be more self-sufficient. So this is about building the voluntary sector, it's about assisting people to be agents out there on a voluntary basis who can assist people to be pointed in the right direction. But it could be more actual precise help in terms of helping a neighbour have a hot meal once a day, or making sure that sort of some gardening's done, that sort of thing. And then SEN transport is another area that we want to audit to make sure that we're getting the criteria right in that area, and that we're getting the options for SEN transport right. At the moment, we have a large number of buses that we send around the borough. It means some children sit on the bus for a long time as they're taken to school, as they do pickups across the borough. It's whether they're better solutions that are better for the child, but also save us some money. Support services are always going to be a key point of focus in any exercise like this, because we want to protect frontline services, and so the support services need to be as efficient as they possibly can be. The things that we've got on this list, full cost recovery. Sometimes we don't always charge the full cost of a service, even though we think we're charging the full cost, so we're reviewing all areas to make sure we're getting the level of the charge accurate, for example on those self-funders. We're looking at all our contracts and market management generally across the borough to make sure we're getting the best deal for residents in terms of the money that we're spending with contractors. There's a number of areas where we're looking at staff performance, so making sure that we're supporting staff to give their best performance and driving up productivity. So that's looking at recruitment, recognition and reward, about making sure that we're working not necessarily harder but smarter, and we're giving people the tools they need to do the job that they are being asked to do. And making sure that we're absolutely identifying talent and making the best of that. We don't think that we're being as commercial as we can be. That links to some of those things above. So sometimes we don't make the proper commercial decision in terms of making sure we are recovering all our costs, or we don't make the proper commercial decision in making sure we're getting the best from our relationships with our contractors. So we want to put a focus around that. And then finally, around this area, we do want to do a review of all services across the council to make sure that we are delivering them through the best method possible. So there may be things currently which are provided as an in-source service, we do it ourselves, that actually would be better if it was being provided by the private sector, or maybe the voluntary sector, or maybe the health sector. There may be things that are actually outsourced at the moment that we think actually we could do a better job of and we want to bring back internally. There may be services that actually we could share with other boroughs, or there may be services where actually a model of actually spinning out a local business to buy back the service from might be the right model. The last two areas in the transformation, the one is around infrastructure. Andrew was talking earlier about the impact of Crossrail on the borough. We are anticipating that that's going to increase the traffic flows, which are already significant in the borough. And we do need to think about how we manage those traffic flows so we make the borough as smooth running as it possibly can be. And smart infrastructure, looking at the new technologies that are becoming available to manage buildings, so making sure we've got all the the right gear in place to be able to make sure we're keeping the temperature of buildings at the correct level, that buildings are telling us when they need to have maintenance done, etc. And then the last few areas are around asset optimisation. We own a lot of assets. We talked about operational buildings in the borough, but actually we own other assets as well. You could include parks in this. Are we making the best use of all the assets that we've got? That could be about some assets, buildings which are no longer required being sold, or it might be they could be leased to get a rental stream to come in for them, or it may be that so we just want to use them in a different sort of a way. We're reviewing all the processes across the borough to make sure that they're as efficient as possible, and we think that there are some processes which we can automate, which will reduce down the sort of human input into those processes. And the website is a good example of that, about making sure that we're making that as efficient as possible, so that again customers are actually getting a better service. They can actually do a transaction from beginning to end at one point in time, rather than maybe the process being broken and a human intervention being needed along the way. And then finally, business intelligence and analytics. We hold an awful lot of data. Obviously, we have to govern that through the GDPR rules, but actually there is space there for us to use that data in order to be able to better inform our decision making, and also to be able to make sure we're targeting our spend in the best way possible. So we can use it, for example, we're looking at single person discounts to see whether everybody that is claiming a single person discount really is living alone in their household, because sometimes people forget to tell you that they've actually, somebody's moved in, and that the discount should fall. So just to summarise the budget situation, back to that headline again, £37.8 million that we need to take out the budget by 22-23, so a big challenge in front of us. We think that our transformation savings and the other savings that we've talked about should take out, well, transformation about 30 million, the other savings reductions about 3 million, but you'll see from the maths that we're still not there yet in terms of our 4-year position, and that's what we're working through at the moment. And just to remind you again that that gap is larger in the first 2 years, so it is a real challenge for us, particularly given the transformation programme is likely to deliver over a slightly longer period. So there is a big challenge that is facing the council in the next 2 years. So one of the final things I wanted to talk to you about was a pact with residents, because actually the scale of the challenge that we're facing means that we can't actually do this on our own. You know, we need to work with the residents in the borough to help us to meet these challenges. We absolutely recognise that a pact has two sides to it. Our side of the pact is that we will ensure that we will keep your council tax as low as we possibly can do. We realise the impact that that has on households in terms of their monthly bills. We will help residents and communities to support each other, so it's not just a walking away, it's a supporting people to become more sustainable. We will build services tailored to the needs of residents and the ambitions for the borough, so it needs to be much more person-centric. We think it's really important that we improve aspiration and opportunity for young people in the borough, so that they can, as I say, that whole sort of self-sustainability. We want to support the local economy to grow, because the more that the businesses that we have successfully in the borough, the more jobs that we'll have, the more money we'll be sort of generating, and particularly for the local authority, obviously sort of that brings in business rates as well, so it's a win-win situation all round. We want to work through our regeneration schemes to improve the housing in the borough. Decent housing means better health, so there's lots of reasons for us to want to focus in that area and really revitalising Havering. And basically working together with residents to make the borough the best it can be. But the other side of that pact is about what we're asking residents to do. Andrew mentioned earlier about the fact that actually we've had to build in £1 million a year, so £4 million over the period to meet waste disposal costs. Actually, if we could just hold the waste that we're generating at the level it's at today, that would immediately take £4 million out of that £37 million. So by actually reducing the amount of stuff that people use, by reusing things, recycling as much as possible, that could make a real significant impact on our budgets. We want residents to get involved in supporting the community, volunteering and helping neighbours. We do want residents to get online, so we do want them to use digital services as much as possible. As I mentioned, those community hubs, where the expectation is that we will be able to provide support there for people who can't get online. We absolutely recognise that vulnerable people sometimes cannot get online, they've not got the skills or the equipment to be able to do that, and we recognise we will always have to provide that support for them. But for the vast majority of people, they have got the access to use services online, but we also need to improve those services online to make them easier for people to access. We want people to commit to be more active and live more healthily. If we can keep everybody in Havering healthy, then again that will reduce down our costs significantly. And I've already mentioned that thing about keeping eyes open for vulnerable people across the community. We want you to support local businesses to succeed, so as much as you can invest back in the shops and the businesses in the borough, that will obviously support the economy. But we do want you to have your say. We want you to let us know when we're getting things wrong, because actually if you feed that back to us, then we can improve. We can build that into our improvement plans. So what we're looking for is building a pride in our Havering, that we all want the best for Havering. And some of that is around keeping Havering safe and clean. So the whole thing around keeping the eyes open for suspicious activity and around sort of not littering, those sorts of things. So just to finish off then, the timetable we're working to at the moment, we're in the public consultation period at the moment. That runs to the end of September. We'll spend October analysing the results from the consultation and building up the proposals that we'll then present to the Cabinet on the 13th of November. It says 14th here, but it's actually on the 13th of November. In December, we find out a bit more information from government as to some of the sources of funding. Although we know we won't get any general grants, there are other bits and pieces of funding that we do receive, and that will allow us to take the proposals through the February Cabinet and then on to council tax setting in February on the 20th.